In the dusty expanses of the Sahel, a fundamental law of modern warfare just got shattered. For decades, everyone believed you needed massive troop deployments, foreign military bases, and endless occupation to defeat insurgencies. But in 2023, Ibrahim Traoré's Burkina Faso proved them catastrophically wrong, and in doing so, exposed just how obsolete the Western approach to African security had become. The moment this shift happened, it wasn't loud. There were no grand announcements or press conferences. Instead, insurgents who had ruled entire regions for years suddenly started vanishing. Terror cells that took months to plan attacks now found themselves surrounded and eliminated within minutes of launching operations. Markets that hadn't seen normal commerce in over a decade began reopening. Civilians walked the streets without paralyzing fear. And the most terrifying part for the established order? It was being done by local forces operating on a fraction of the budget and a completely different philosophy than the international security models that had failed for 20 years. This is the story of the Black Panther Force and how it's becoming the most consequential shift in African military strategy this century. To understand the magnitude of what's happening right now, you need to understand what came before. The Sahel region, that vast band of semi-arid landscapes stretching across West Africa from Mauritania to Chad, has been a graveyard for security strategies since roughly 2010. That's when Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and their various splinter groups discovered something brilliant. The Sahel was the perfect place to operate. The terrain is massive, sparsely populated, and incredibly difficult to patrol. Groups like AQIM, ISIS-K, and dozens of other terrorist organizations could hide, train, recruit, and plan operations with virtually no consequences. So what did the international community do? The obvious thing, they sent more soldiers, more bases, more technology, more resources. France deployed thousands of troops under Operation Serval. The United States established military presences across multiple countries. Germany, Britain, and others followed. Billions of dollars were invested. Training missions expanded. The military-industrial complex ramped up production. And on paper, this should have worked. But it didn't. Not even close. The numbers tell the story of spectacular failure. When the French operation started in 2013, there were estimated to be around 200 to 400 active militants in Mali. By the time Operation Serval ended in 2022, after spending over a decade and 48 billion euros, the number of militants had multiplied by factors that still horrify military analysts. Estimates range from 20 to 30 times higher. Deaths related to terrorism in the Sahel had exploded exponentially. Displaced populations, women and children living in refugee camps, entire regions becoming ungoverned spaces. The conventional approach had achieved the exact opposite of its stated objectives. And what's worse, it had entrenched the insurgency. This is where Ibrahim Traoré entered the picture. Traoré came to power in Burkina Faso through a military coup in September 2022, overthrowing a president who had lost the confidence of the military because security had deteriorated catastrophically. But Traoré wasn't interested in continuing the same failing playbook. He was a young military officer who had fought against insurgents, who understood the terrain, who knew the enemy's psychology. And most importantly, he asked a radical question. What if everything the international community believes about counterinsurgency is wrong? Instead of massive deployments, conventional bases, and slow-moving operations, Traoré and his military commanders began building something completely different. They called it the Black Panther Force, a unit designed around an entirely new operational philosophy. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just about being faster or meaner. This was about completely inverting the strategy of how to fight an insurgency. The conventional approach, the one France, America, and international partners had been using, was based on this logic. You put soldiers on the ground, you occupy territory, you establish bases, you create a permanent security presence that prevents the enemy from operating. It's the logic of medieval castle building. The enemy can't defeat you if you're fortified. It made sense for a certain type of warfare. It made no sense for the Sahel. The Black Panther Force inverted this entirely. Instead of occupying territory, they became hypermobile. Instead of slow-moving convoys, they operated in small precision strike teams. Instead of traditional rules of engagement, they relied on real-time intelligence. And here's the key: they didn't chase the insurgents. They hunted their infrastructure. Think about how an insurgency actually survives. It's not about individual fighters or even commanders. An insurgency is a system. It needs fuel to power vehicles and generators. It needs money to pay fighters, buy weapons, and maintain legitimacy. It needs communication networks to coordinate attacks across regions. It needs supply routes to move ammunition, medical supplies, and food. It needs safe houses and recruiting centers. Remove any of these elements, and the system begins to collapse. Destroy all of them simultaneously, and the insurgency doesn't gradually weaken. It catastrophically fails. This is what the Black Panther Force started targeting. Using real-time intelligence, data collected from human sources, electronic surveillance, signals intelligence. These units could identify exactly where fuel caches were stored, where money transfers were being coordinated, which communication nodes insurgents were using, which routes they depended on. Then they would strike, not to kill insurgents, though that happened. They struck to obliterate the network that kept the insurgency alive. But the truly revolutionary part was the speed. Once intelligence confirmed a target, operations could be launched within minutes, not weeks or months. An insurgent cell planning to ambush a convoy on Tuesday might find themselves surrounded by Black Panther forces before they could leave their position on Tuesday morning. The enemy was accustomed to having time to escape, time to regroup, time to reorganize. Suddenly, they didn't have any. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. For nearly 15 years, insurgents in the Sahel had operated with a degree of impunity. They lost individual fighters and commanders, sure, but the organization itself remained intact and often grew. They had adapted to foreign militaries. They knew how they operated. They could predict their patterns. They could hide from their drone surveillance. They could wait out their operations. But they couldn't adapt to something that moved at the speed of information. Within months of the Black Panther Force becoming operational, the dynamics started visibly shifting. Terrorist cells that had controlled territory for years suddenly found themselves on the run. Groups that had seemed almost unstoppable found their command structures decapitated. The pace of attacks dropped. The confidence of insurgents, always their greatest asset, began to crack. And then something remarkable happened that no one had predicted. Civilians started returning. Markets in Burkina Faso's major cities began opening again. Not fully, not everywhere, but for the first time in years, people were willing to risk venturing out. Children went back to school. Women started conducting commerce in public spaces. The military checkpoints that had been omnipresent because the government had relied on a massive security footprint were no longer necessary everywhere. The Black Panther Force achieved what the French and American approaches could not. They restored normalcy without requiring an occupation force. This is where the story becomes genuinely dangerous to the established order. For 2 decades, the standard argument in Washington, Paris, and Brussels was that African nations couldn't secure themselves without Western assistance, that they needed advanced technology, Western trainers, international coordination. The implicit message, sometimes very explicit, was that African military forces were ineffective, that they needed to be managed by external powers, that the partnership was really about Western nations providing security as a kind of benevolent guardianship. The Black Panther Force shattered this narrative. Here was an African nation, deploying African soldiers, using African intelligence networks, operating according to African strategic logic, and delivering results that Western militaries with far greater resources, technology, and experience had failed to deliver. The implications rippled through geopolitical circles immediately. The first casualty of this new reality was the French presence itself. Emmanuel Macron's government had invested political capital in African security operations for decades. Operation Serval, Operation Barkhane, the various training missions, they were presented as necessary, as benevolent, as the backbone of regional stability. But if Burkinabe forces could deliver better results without French troops, without French command structures, without deferring to French strategy, then what was the point? And if Burkina Faso could do it, what about Mali, Niger, and other nations that had also begun to turn away from Western security partnerships? France began its withdrawal from Burkina Faso in 2023. By early 2024, the withdrawal was complete. The military bases that had represented French power projection in West Africa for over a decade were handed over or abandoned. It was a stunning geopolitical reversal, not because of military defeat, but because French security models had become irrelevant. But understanding why the Black Panther Force works reveals something deeper about the future of warfare itself. The old approach relied on what strategists call kinetic dominance, the ability to put more firepower in a place than the enemy could match. You want to occupy a city? We'll deploy enough forces to make it too costly to challenge. You want to hide in the hills? We'll patrol enough that hiding becomes impossible. This works if you have unlimited resources and the enemy is conventional. But insurgencies aren't conventional, and even wealthy nations eventually run out of political will. The Black Panther Force operates on a completely different principle: intelligence dominance. If you know where your enemy is, what they're doing, what they're planning, and you can act on that information faster than they can react, then numerical superiority becomes almost irrelevant. A small, fast force with perfect information can outmaneuver a large force with incomplete information, not just marginally, catastrophically. This is what the future of asymmetric warfare looks like. It's not about matching your enemy's technology or firepower. It's about operating at a speed and with information density that your enemy cannot match. The Black Panther Force achieves this through three critical elements, working in perfect coordination: collection, processing, and action. Collection happens continuously. Human intelligence networks deep within insurgent groups. Electronic surveillance of communication patterns. Signals intelligence intercepting transmissions. Informants identifying supply movements. All of this feeding into a central intelligence system constantly generating targets. Processing is almost instantaneous. Data is analyzed, confirmed, and prioritized by command in near real time. Action follows within minutes. Strike teams are already mobile, ready to move the moment a target is confirmed. They hit the target, collect intelligence from it, feed that into the system, and move to the next one. It's a cycle that insurgents cannot break because every component operates at speeds they cannot match. Of course, this strategy carries enormous risks that deserve serious examination. The entire approach depends on near-perfect intelligence. If you're basing operations on real-time data and moving at extreme speed, there's virtually no margin for error. If intelligence is wrong by even a modest amount, if targets are misidentified, if timing is slightly off, operations that are supposed to be surgical can become disasters. Civilian casualties become a risk, not just because of collateral damage, but because the speed of operations leaves little room for verification. Similarly, sustained operational intensity at this level is exhausting. Human beings, even elite soldiers, can only maintain this pace for so long before fatigue degrades judgment. Command structures need to rest. Intelligence analysts can only maintain perfect accuracy for so long before mistakes creep in. The system is designed to win quickly and decisively. If it needs to sustain intensity for years or decades, the risks compound. And there's a deeper strategic risk too: sustainability. The Black Panther Force works brilliantly when facing an insurgency that is trying to establish territorial control and build a conventional organization. But what if insurgents adapt to these tactics? What if they stop trying to maintain infrastructure and instead fragment into smaller, more dispersed cells with fewer communication needs? What if they shift to lone wolf attacks or cell-based operations that don't require command coordination? The strategy has brilliant answers to a 2012 to 2023 insurgency operating with 2012 to 2023 assumptions. But intelligence, strategy, and tactics evolve. The military theorists and geopolitical analysts watching Burkina Faso understand all of this, which is why there's such intense interest in whether this model succeeds or fails long-term. Because if it works, if the Black Panther Force can sustain these results, if insurgency actually declines over the next several years, if Sahel stability is genuinely restored, then this represents a permanent shift in how regional security will be organized in Africa. It means African nations will demand control over their own security strategies. It means the era of Western security partnerships built on assumptions of African incapacity is over. It means China, Russia, and other powers willing to respect African sovereignty in security matters will find much more receptive partners. It means the entire architecture of Western influence in Africa shifts fundamentally. And if it fails, if sustained operations at this intensity prove unsustainable, if intelligence degradation leads to catastrophic mistakes, if the insurgency adapts faster than the military can respond, if speed without margin for error proves to be exactly as dangerous as it sounds, then the military argument circles back to the conventional approach. You need massive, sustainable, permanent forces on the ground. You need occupation. You need bases, which conveniently pushes nations back toward relationships with powers that can provide those things. So what's happening in Burkina Faso right now, in 2025, isn't just a tactical or even strategic military question. It's a geopolitical question of enormous magnitude. It's about who controls the future security architecture of Africa. It's about whether Western powers can maintain influence through irreplaceability or whether they've been made redundant by something faster, leaner, and more culturally attuned. The metrics we should be watching are deceptively simple. Are terrorist attacks in Burkina Faso continuing to decline? Are markets staying open? Is the government expanding territorial control without expanding military bases? Are civilians continuing to move back to previously contested areas? Are insurgent recruitment and morale actually collapsed, or are they adapting? Is the military sustaining this operational tempo without degradation? Or are signs of fatigue and mistakes beginning to appear? Ibrahim Traoré has staked his legitimacy on this strategy. His government's survival depends on continued security improvements. But even more importantly, the entire region is watching. Mali has been experimenting with similar approaches. Niger has shown interest. Other West African nations dealing with insurgencies are studying what Burkina Faso is doing. If it works, if it can be replicated and sustained, this becomes the new standard for counterinsurgency in Africa. Not because some Western think tank published a paper recommending it, but because it delivers results. What makes this genuinely extraordinary is that it happened not because of superior Western technology or training, but because someone looked at the problem differently. The international community was so committed to the conventional logic, occupying territory, maintaining bases, relying on partnerships with Western militaries, that they couldn't see that the entire premise might be wrong. Speed might matter more than size. Intelligence might matter more than firepower. Mobility might matter more than fortification. The insurgents themselves probably didn't expect to be fighting a different kind of enemy. They had adapted to French approaches, American approaches, even combined international approaches. But they hadn't adapted to something that moved like information instead of like an army. They hadn't experienced what it's like to face an adversary that was already moving before they knew they'd been detected. There's a deeper lesson embedded in all of this for anyone watching geopolitical developments. The assumption that has driven Western foreign policy for decades, that Western models are universally superior, that developing nations need to adopt Western strategies, that progress means convergence toward Western approaches, has been quietly invalidated by people simply trying to solve their own problems in their own ways. The Black Panther Force isn't just about defeating insurgencies in the Sahel. It's about demonstrating that there are multiple ways to organize military strategy, that local forces with local knowledge can outperform foreign forces with foreign assumptions, and that the future of geopolitical influence might belong to nations willing to support African agency rather than African dependence. What happens over the next 2 to 3 years in Burkina Faso will likely determine not just the security trajectory of the Sahel, but the broader pattern of international relationships across Africa for decades to come. And the most important part? The power to determine that outcome rests entirely with Africans. The real question now is whether the results speak loud enough to be heard above the noise of conventional wisdom.